respective language sections? Perfect. Well, hello and welcome to day 5 of the Claremont Eco Forum. This year's the 14th International Forum on Ecological Civilization. And today's discussion, today's topic, including our panel discussion and our small group discussions, is around rethinking communities and cultures for the common good. What does it look like to organize human communities and to have cultures that promote the long-term well-being of people on the planet? And we have a wonderful group of panelists here to share their expertise from very different perspectives, which is exactly what we need. And a wonderful moderator, Dr. Philip Clayton, who will introduce our panelists and get this show on the road. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrew, and welcome to the audience today. On day 5, we have a particularly important panel and a particularly famous group of speakers to address you. I will not read their whole bios, but just to say that their names are David Bollier, one of the world's experts in commoning and forms of commoning in communities. Monica Polacca, a famous scholar from the Center for Earth Ethics. Seonae Jeong from South Korea, Seoul, specialist, and Professor Kongjian from Peking University. And I'm happy to announce this year's winner of the John Cobb Common Award. Congratulations, Professor Yu.
Thank you.
As a panel, we have decided not to give long talks, but to make our focus moving directly to the questions of communities and the importance of focusing on communities. So we have agreed on 3 questions that each of the 4 panelists will address. And we will begin in the order in which they appear on my screen, and maybe also on your screens. I will ask the question that we have talked about in advance, and they will share their first thoughts. It is our priority that we will answer very brief, short answers so that there is lots of time for the panelists to respond to your questions as audience members. We approve and appreciate that in the format of today's meeting, we are a panel of 4 who will be sharing thoughts, and then we move into discussion groups where the concrete work of living in community is worked out. So we would like to give you all the resources of these 4 experts so that as you move into your discussions in 1 hour, you will be able to have the most productive discussions possible. Professor Yu, you are my first person on my screen. So I ask you first the question, and then we move to the other 3 panelists. Our first question is for these experts to say, why do you believe that it is important to focus primarily on local communities? What is the significance of making this focus area central? Professor Yu, would you like to begin?
Yes, thank you, Phil. It is obvious. We are always talk about the think globally and act locally. Locally means the ecology, the nature is diverse. So adaptation to nature certainly means we have diverse cultural strategy, and that's why we have to be and human being biologically and culturally is diverse. I would say biologically and culturally is diverse. So any group, any kind of community has their own solution to their own specific situation, whether in the south monsoon climate or in dry alpine mountain community. They have loved for a long time, for centuries, for hundreds, thousands of years. They have the solutions, they have the strategy to adapt their own climate, their own situation, and find their own unique way of living. That's why we have to focus on local community. The local community take care of their own piece of land because they have unique value. They now have the wisdom to do this, to take care of this piece of land. Yeah, that's my answer.
Beautiful, thank you, Kongjian. Seonae, would you like to mention why do you focus on local communities as so central?
네, 저는 먼저 지역이
First of all, I'd like to mention that the local community has value as the center of democracy. For citizens to live, they gather in the community and they relate each other. And they, as Professor Yu mentioned, and also Professor Clayton mentioned, that diversity is found and the value is found in the community, and people find their own interests and they find room for contribution. So that is the place of community. So based on that, they contribute to making their community better. They raise their voices, and that is the basic element. Community is the basic element. So country, the nation is too big for the ordinary citizens to raise voices. So for people to relate each other, the nation is too big. So I believe the local community is very important.
Thank you very much, Seonae. David, what would be there's so much to say, but launch us off with some of the most important parts from your perspective.
Well, I agree with the two other commenters in general. I would just add some other points. One is part of our problems are large systems, and I don't believe they can be fixed at scale. Repairing them requires that we revisit and reinvent you might say, the smaller components and sub-assemblies of our big systems. And that means the local. And I think that's where the DNA that grows into larger institutions occurs. The local also has greater room for experimentation and innovation because the stakes and ramifications are lower. It's not as huge, which allows for the diversity of experimentation that we need to see what can work and then to grow that up and allow larger institutions to give them greater scope over time. But another reason that I think the local matters is because state power and citizen power needs to be distributed, because consolidated centralized power is often a setup for corruption and cronyism and entrenching the status quo interests. And so we need to have distributed, localized power to allow that diversity and innovation to manifest, to be able to grow. And then, as was mentioned by others, to have locally adapted solutions. And it may be that the local is really the only political space where we can have far-reaching innovation, because often the power of the state and bureaucracies and large corporations don't welcome the kind of paradigm-shifting innovation that we need. So as a commons, as somebody who studies the commons, I'm very keen on empowering local communities, because I think that's where the innovation and drive for system change is going to come from.
Thank you very much, David. Can we turn to you, Mona, for your opening statement about the importance of focusing on communities?
I agree with all of the previous comments that were made. For me, local is very important because, you know, when you're making decisions about the lived experience of a particular group or community, there are a lot of considerations that must be made. And one is historical. What are the historical events that have occurred that have created the existing communities? Considerations for the geographical location, considerations for the land, what kind of soil they have, what kind of perhaps various the diverse cultures that live in a particular area, as including governmental structures that may not necessarily be part of what seems to be the approach taken globally is one size fits all. It's very important for consideration of the unique value of each community on the local level.
Thanks. Thank you all. What we wanted to do in this session, because we're speaking of specific and concrete local communities, we want to make our discussion as concrete as possible. So the participants have been asked to give 2 concrete examples of living according to this recognition of the interdependence of people and planet, to talk about the centrality of the local community as a model for the way that humans will need to live on the planet in a time of climate crisis. We want to get very concrete, each person speaking about his or her work with local communities and holding up for you some examples to concentrate on. Let's reverse the order and begin, if I may, with Mona this time, and we'll go backwards. Mona, can you share with us some of the communities you know and why they seem so important to you as models?
Okay, let's take, for instance, this water that I'm sitting in front of. This is a beautiful creek. It's a water that flows in the bottom of the Grand Canyon on the traditional lands and territory of the tribe called the Havasupai people. Havasupai means the people of the blue water. And in order to get to this village at the bottom of the Grand Canyon, you either hike 8 miles, ride a horse or a mule 8 miles, or you can ride a helicopter that flies maybe 2 or 3 times a week down into the canyon. So when you're considering the uniqueness of a community, even mail is still delivered by what they call mule train on the backs of mules that carry the mail down to the bottom of the canyon to the village. It's a very delicate balance of existence in this location. And the land base of this community is 1 mile wide and 3 miles long. And so if you were to consider the delivery of things like the infrastructure for electricity, that's a major issue. If you're going to consider even delivery of food into the village for the store, that's another major consideration, because it has to all be packed down by mule, horse, or on the helicopter. And so it's a whole different kind of a system of existence at the bottom of the Grand Canyon for this tribal nation.
Thank you, Mona. David, from your work with the Common Strategies Group, you're well familiar with specific needs of the Commons movement. Can you share some examples from your work for the audience?
Yes, well, I've learned a lot of lessons from indigenous peoples who I think have such a deep and rich traditions of being interdependent with the earth over long periods of time. And one example I'd like to cite is the potato park in Peru, where the Quechua people, 6 different communities, 7,000 people, are the designated stewards of what's called an indigenous biocultural heritage area that was started in the year 2000. And their specific goal is to protect the most biodiverse collection of potatoes in the world. There's some 2,300 of the 4,000 known potato varieties are grown in this area. And unfortunately, they're often in jeopardy of biotech companies trying to engage in biopiracy, trying to do genetic prospecting and patent some of the biodiversity there. But as the designated stewards of this land, they've been able to, they have a legal regime as well as their own cultural practices for protecting the potatoes, for preserving the ecosystems, and honoring their own biocultural heritage, which is an intrinsic part of this whole process. And the park is 12,000 hectares, so it's rather large. But I find this as something of a model for the West to emulate, even though we don't have obviously as rich or deep traditions. But I would point to some of the systems like permaculture and agroecology, which try to work on many similar dynamic interactive principles with the land, such as observe and interact, produce no waste, use small and slow solutions, use and value diversity, creatively use and respond to change. These are some principles of permaculture. And so these dynamics, which can be adapted to many different local circumstances, can be, I think, highly effective in getting us to where we want to go. And I think, again, looking at some of the examples pioneered by indigenous people can be certain islands of possibility can be created in modern contexts as well.
Thank you, David. I love the concreteness of your examples and of your answer. Seonae, you have worked with the People's Alliance for Economic Justice, with Citizens Action Network, with the Korean Human Rights Foundation. What are some of the ways that you believe civil society is strengthened through these local communities?
네. 그 서울시의 이제 에너지 자립마을 운동을 소개해드리고 싶습니다. 그 2011년에 우리 이웃 국가인 일본에서 이제 후쿠시마 원전 사태 이후로 한국에서 원전에 대해서 이제 위험성과 그다음에 대체 에너지를 만들어야 되겠다는 시민적 각성 이런 것들이 광범위하게
So
We have talked about a lot of the difficulties and the dangers of the nuclear power plant after the accident in the Fukushima in Japan. So the Seoul recognized the awareness to have some energy sufficient project. And as you can see, the Seoul has a lot of apartment complexes, and our first step is to save energies from that the apartment complexes. We build solar panels for the apartment complexes, and the residents works as some energy steward. They just visit household to household to encourage them to save more energies and encourage them to switch to the solar panel. And there's energy supermarket villages, and this is villages where they are using and producing the eco-friendly energy tools and toolkits from the young children to the adults and seniors. They try to understand the importance of the energy saving and the alternative energies. As a result of that, from 2012, this whole city is campaigning to reduce one nuclear plants by saving energies. So currently we are working on to save 2 units of nuclear power plants. That is grassroots activities. What is more important is that many regions and the locals have tried to save energies in practical ways. They are not only building solar panels, but also building some energy storages, and they can just store the extra energy, surplus energies, to provide it at the time they need it. So it will work as a prime water for the local government to reflect those ideas into policies. So not only the local, but also the central government to try to provide some support for these kind of local communities. What is more important is that local has been working as some hub and the center to make a transition. And there are one important village is named Suntaek Gold Village. And from last year, that village is having some transition center to make an energy transition. So some leaders and store owners voluntarily save energies, and they also even recycle waste from that area, and they just find their own solution to turn that waste into bioenergy. So it's kind of energy cooperative. So there are a lot of the cooperative activities coming up. So all that small activities lead to saving to nuclear power plant energy. So it is meaningful in that way.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We turn finally to Professor Yu as the Dean of the Graduate School of Landscape Architecture at Peking University, and also the President of Turnscape. You must work with many specific examples of transformation through local communities. Can you share an example or two with us? You're muted. Your mute is on.
It is, I think it's critical for how we manage the planet. The major work right now I'm doing is how to manage water wisely, to decentralize the water management system, which I call the sponge land or sponge city or sponge planet. I was born in a village in China, in South China, called the Dongyu village in Jinhua city, in Zhejiang province. For 15 years, I live in that village. I drink from the river, the channel, and dig holes, dig ponds in the village. There's 7 ponds in the villages. But suddenly, when I left my village and went to school, and the China began the industrialization, the movement of industrialization. So we have the centralized water system coming, the irrigation system, the damming system, the channel system. So the local, very, very sensitive water system, which been existing for 1,000 years, totally destroyed. Now when I'm back to China, I want to go back to my village. I can see that the river been polluted. We get more drought and flood risk even higher, right? Because of monsoon climate. Now the reason is that when the local community or the family manages their own water, it's distributed. They create a pond. For 2,000 years, the Chinese already learned, the village learned that whenever you cultivate 4 hectares of land, you need 1 hectare of water, pond, to regulate the drought and the flood. So we adapt this kind of monsoon climate to cultivate and maintain the land and make it sustainable for 1,000 years, at least. Now suddenly, this urban planner, the centralized planner come in, and they create this big reservoir upstream. So cut off the whole stream, right? So the river being cut off, build a high dam, and then create this irrigation system. This centralized irrigation system, try to manage the water. But you can see that the big reservoir will accumulate the flood risk, because the monsoon season, you cannot hold the water in one reservoir. So the reservoir have to drain away the water during the monsoon season. But 3 months later, we get the drought. We have no rainfall. So they have tried to distribute this through the irrigation system, but that is not enough. That's not enough. So that's make a more serious risk of climate risk, I mean, a drought. For climate change, even we have more extreme climate, more extreme flood. So that's why I right now, as a big, for 20 years, what I'm doing right now is to recover the ancient wisdom to manage the water, we call the sponge system, to distribute the water resources system. Instead of centralize the water supply, centralize the flood control, right now we remove the concrete and recover this wetland system along the river, so that we can regulate water on site, recharge water aquifer, and clean the water on site. You know, what's the problem today? Because of centralized hydrological system. So families buy, I mean, individual farmers buy chemical from factory, and the chemical is so cheap, they overuse. 60% of chemicals used in the soil, and the 6% just drain away through this centralized water system, and all the way go to the big river, the Yangtze River, and eventually dump into the ocean. Now that's the difference. Okay. Centralization, water system, and the decentralized sponge city or sponge planet or sponge land system. That's what I mean. Sponge means community, resilient. Yeah.
Thank you, Professor Yu. We have so many audience questions. We have 2 questions for every speaker. So we will set aside our questions, and I will direct the questions that have come in to each speaker in order. Ask you again, just 2 minutes for each answer, so we can respond to the audience as much as possible, if that's okay. The first question that came in is for David Bollier, and it is from Meijun Fan, the Executive Director of the Institute for the Postmodern Development of China. Professor Fan asks for David, how can local communities have more power? How do we break down the corporation's power? Can the local communities own their own mountains, water and land, and so forth, so that nobody can take that ownership away from them? David.
Well, unfortunately, centralized national state power and corporate power tends to be much stronger than local communities. And that creates a problem, especially since nonprofit advocacy groups and political parties are not necessarily going to be advocates for local communities. I happen to think that for local communities to create their own community charters or commons charters in which they assert their needs, their moral claims to be stewards of a certain resource, whether a mountain or a river or the farmland, that this has value in organizing the community and creating, you might say, a proto-political power that can start to make claims against the state, if not create, you might say, trans-local communities as well. In the United States, this has occurred with many communities where gas fracking is occurring, where communities create their own charters and claim that they have a municipal ordinance that the outsiders are violating. Well, this sets up a legal and political test case, you might say, in which it becomes a public controversy. And I think that's part of the necessary process for local communities to acquire more power that they can assert over time. But obviously that's a more complicated question that the questioner asks. How does a community empower itself, basically?
Thanks, David, but we appreciate the detail and expertise of your answer. And for this recording, which will be on the web at Eco Forum, Claremont Eco Forum, many people will be able to listen to your answers later. The next question is from Mona Polacca. Mona, as president of Turtle Island Project, as a member of the International Council of 13 Indigenous Grandmothers, we want to ask, a questioner wants to ask about the role of Indigenous examples. So when we think of local communities, the earliest local communities of humanity have been Indigenous communities. Can you tell us some of the core principles for successful local communities from indigenous wisdom?
From what I understand, the way I was raised is what we call the original instructions, which were instructions that we were given about how we would live in this world on Mother Earth, how we would take care of the water, which takes care of us, which we call our first foundation of life, how we would take care of the air, how we would take care of the land, that we have it's a responsibility that involves reciprocity. The earth and the water, all of these life-giving elements, they give to us life. We in turn must maintain the balance and the cleanliness of it. The health of it is our health. And as we say, water is life. It's important that we have continued to uphold those original instructions. And this is how the message we've been given the responsibility to continue to pass on and share. We were told that this time would come when there would be chaos and imbalance on the earth, and that we would need to go ahead and sit at the table and share our worldview about how to bring balance back into the world.
Mona, that is a very beautiful answer. Thank you very much. Seonae, you have held leading roles in Seoul metropolitan government since 2013 as the first chair of the NPO Support Center, and then since 2019 as Director General for Seoul Innovation. A member of the audience wants to know, what is the meaning of the word local in Seoul municipality, which has 10 million people as its population? How do you understand local in where 70% of South Koreans live? Can you talk to us?
네. 두 가지 차원이 있을 것 같은데요.
I think we can approach with two perspectives. In Seoul, there are independent the administration offices, and that is about like 25 divided provinces, areas. So normally there are about 100,000 populations. So that is more about like the area focused, and also we have province dividing the smaller local sections called Dong, and there are about 20,000 people living in each Dong. And the Seoul government has given authority to smaller Dongs. In the past, Seoul city government used to take control on budget, and it used to have more power. However, that the Seoul city government started giving more power to local community called Dong. So each Dong holds their own community council, and they decide what they need. So they come up with their budget. So this budget it comes from the Seoul city government. So the Seoul city government encourages the local community to do their actions based on their requirements. So as we've been moving forward with the giving more power to Dong, the local community has found out that they need to produce their own needs. In the past, they used to rely on the Seoul city government. They used to rely on the national level. However, there are local community, like civil corporations are arising. So I can see that people thinking how they're going to recycle, and also the caring for children, for the elderly, and education. So for these subjects that now civil societies are working together by forming cooperatives. And there are various experiments and movements taking place in the local community called Dong. So to revitalize the local community, movement, it is important the government, the local, the major government gives authority and budget to the local levels and encourages them to find their own solutions. So we need to make a civil base. That is the first foundation. So as this accumulation of commonwealth is accumulated in the local level, that we can extend the cooperation with larger part of the nation.
Thank you. Thank you, Seonae. That's very helpful. And finally, Professor Yu, the audience has asked you a very similar question to the question that Ms. Jeong just answered. Namely, the audience is very interested in the experiments that you described in the beginning of your comments. And they wondered, do you have the freedom, the ability to do this local planning as an urban planner and an ecological urbanist, to do this local planning and local experimentation in a centrally planned nation like China? How is there such possibility for you to do this innovation work? They were interested in your answer to this question.
Okay, yeah, it's a two aspect. If you want to do to decentralize this system, for example, water, sponge city. First of all, is that you have to convince the leadership again. You have to make use of this centralized system for them to understand, right? To make it possible to decentralize this kind of practice. So I have spent a lot of time lecturing, teaching, talking to mayors. I write letter to leaders of China and to convince them that we have to. Certainly, I don't want to change the system, but make use of the system to change the practice. Now that's the key. Okay, that's the key. So as a sponge city now become a national movement in China, it's every city depend on to create a kind of decentralized water management system. Now this is certainly we work within the centralized system to practice the decentralized landscape planning. That's one key. The second issue here, we still have this very strong infrastructure. I call it intellectual infrastructure that safeguarding this centralized policy, centralized system. For example, code system. So hydrological code system in China is totally disastrous. I mean, you have to fight against this code system, breakthrough, you know. So the second aspect of my work is try to negotiate, to fight against this code system which being built to support this centralized water supply or water management system. And you have to use the power, again, the power to break through this kind of centralized code system or engineering solution. Now that's I think that's my answer. But not too detailed. I have so many detailed examples. But certainly you have to really, when you change the system, you have to make use of the system first. It's the power to break through this the code, the intellectual infrastructure. Yes.
Professor Yu, that's a beautiful answer. In order to change the system, you have to make use of the power of the system first to bring about change. That is a brilliant principle. It transitions very nicely to the next question, which is a question to the whole panel. So any of you can answer. It is the question, what two changes, if you could have two changes that would strengthen local communities in your context, what would be the two changes you would most want to lead to thriving, healthy local communities of people? Anybody? Two ideas for each panelist, they ask. Anybody can jump in.
Well, I think you misframed the question a little bit, in that I think it's not going to be confined to a given community. It will be infrastructures. And I think there will be some collective infrastructures, whether they're translocal networks of local groups that coordinate and communicate with each other, or personally, I think that there's a shared discourse and vocabulary of movements that are translocal that can help them realize they're not alone and start to form precisely those kind of networks. So that would be hugely more empowering than a one-off individual project, important as those could be.
Nice. Thanks, David. That's a good corrective. What's the infrastructure, if you could choose one innovation at that level that would have the greatest effect on the communities you work with, what would you choose?
Well, I would say, apart from developing a shared language and discourse, I'm preferential to the language of the commons in my personal work. But I think that there's a whole number of what I call commons public partnerships, where the government realizes that bureaucracy and political action is incapable of doing stuff, or simply distrusted or seen as illegitimate, and that the government can strike partnerships, especially at the municipal level, where it's less ideological and closer to the people, and develop working relationships in which the state empowers, facilitates legally, technically, financially, but people are empowered to develop their own solutions, you might say open source style. And we've seen how open source is a tremendously innovative, distributed way of doing things that work. And I think centralized governments and bureaucracies need to learn that lesson and be more enlightened in empowering those bottom-up solutions.
Brilliant. A public commons partnerships, especially at the city level.
Yes, although I would revise that, say commons public, because I think
there we go.
That says the commons is the key player rather than the government. And
Fair
I think
enough.
I might add that this is a healthy contrast to public-private partnerships, which are often just private ripoffs of the public treasury.
Touche. For the other three panelists, what one or two changes would you most wish to see?
Well, for me, again, if you, when you're working with this very centralized system, you really only one wish is that you have some very innovative leadership. Mayor, local mayor, to understand that you need to lose the power. I think that's my only wish. You an innovator, an innovator.
Kongjian, some people have spoken of the need for a champion for there to be change at the local level. Is that another word?
Yeah, I think so. A champion, but this champion is got power. Is within the system. Okay. If there's such a very tight centralized system, you can do nothing without this innovator who has the power.
Thank you very much. Mona or Seonae, what idea would you like to share?
I would like to go along with what David has just said about the commons, and that in that understanding that if you live along a waterway like a river, that what you do with that, all of the water that you have some influence on also has an influence on the ones that are downstream, downriver. It's important for us to understand that we're not all the only ones basically having these needs that need to be met to assure a good quality of life.
Thank you. That's a very sharp response. Seonae, do you have an answer you would like to share?
네, 저도 커먼즈에
Yes. I'd like to also share my ideas about commons. So far, we have heavily depended on the nations and the market so far, but it doesn't belong to states or the nation, but it all belong to us. So we have to develop a way to manufacture and manage the commons. We have to come up with some ideas the way. As David mentioned before, the Seoul city joined the PEP city, which is the Global Coalition for the Local Production. And in particular, they are working for the sustainable Earth. For example, they build a vertical garden by using of the electric waste. So if anyone develop some tools or ideas or technologies for that, then they just open that idea to the open source, and that can be freely used by other people to apply it to their local community. So it has getting momentum, and that make possible to have a local production. So we have to have some coalition and activities as a commoners, then we can realize and we can have commons that belong to the community, not to the state.
Mhm. Thank you very much. Thank you. That's very, very helpful. We have a question from our host, Andrew Schwartz, which is a difficult question to the whole panel. So I invite one or two people to share. And now he's holding his dog, so we know it's a very serious question. Andrew asks all of you this question. Are some matters better handled? It's in your chat, by the way. You can see it about 5 from the bottom of your chat if you want to read it. Are some matters better handled at provincial or national or even international levels rather than at local or individual levels? If so, what are some of those things? And how can these higher levels of governance be empowered to perform these functions without overpowering local communities? Anyone?
Well, go ahead, Professor.
Well, I think the air pollution should be controlled at the national or government and provincial levels. Protection of forest, upstream forest should be managed by the central government. These are very, very important. I think these are these two major issues which cannot be managed by local communities. These are national policy, national power, strong power. Yeah.
Thank you, Kongjian. Others, David?
Well, I think I disagree a little bit in that India, for example, has a community forest system where the bureaucracy and the local communities enact and the national bureaucracy set standards. And while that's sometimes doesn't work terribly well, I think it's the right idea in terms of having larger scale performance goals and standards, but local implementation with that oversight. And I think that's sort of the challenge is bureaucracy trying to get that right. Unfortunately, the larger scale governmental units tend to become politically compromised. And so they don't want to set neutral, empowering standards. They want to listen to the most powerful political players who are beating on their door. So that's, I think, the conundrum that has to be solved for the larger scale state entities to really empower the local is getting the politics figured out.
I'd just like to make a comment. You know, I would say that, you know, if that worked, because that's kind of what the way it is now, the status quo now. If that worked, we wouldn't be having the conversation we're having right now, right? I mean, that's the way I see it.
Yep.
I feel like it's important right now to consider a new paradigm. And that's why we're having this conversation, I believe, that the current and existing system isn't working. It's being detrimental to, you know, the health and welfare of all of life, not only human beings, but also the plants, the animals, the water life. All of life is being impacted by the existing system. That's my thought.
Thank you, Mona. I want to come back to your expression, the new paradigm, at the end. We have only about 10 minutes, but Seonae wanted to talk to this question from Andrew.
네, 저는 이제 국가 레벨에서 산업
Well,
정책은 꼭
the industrial policy should be made at the national level. In terms of Korea, the Korean government nurtured the heavy industries, and that was the foundation for Korea to make economic development. And in the 2000s, we government nurtured the digital industry. But what is critical is that the government should focus on the carbon-free industry. Because so when they are setting out the policies, they have to understand the consequence and the impact of the policy. That means how we reduce the carbons to produce the certain goods and services, and how to treat the emission. So that kind of policy should be set out at the national level instead of a local level to achieve ultimate goal of the world. And the second thing is that the alliance between the cities has become very active. That is kind of a paradigm shift from the state-oriented system to the local community system. For example, last year, in the face of climate change, Seoul city government, faster than the the central government, Seoul gathered the local, other provincial governments to declare the climate crisis. And each city set out their own goal to cut the emissions depending on their current situation. So I believe there are a lot more coalition between cities around the world for the sustainable cause. Eclay is one good example, and it has more than 1,500 cities to join the cause to set out eco-friendly policies for their cities. I think that is a big changes in the latest decade. So among many changes, in the context of the cities, the local communities are much easier to join their hands. And there's a P4G where Seoul take part in. It is not only focused on the environment, but also socio-economic activities. So we are building the cooperation between cities. And that is very meaningful change, I believe.
Thank you, Seonae. We know that the panel has prepared an answer to a third question. I want to give time for one or two or all, if they wish, to respond to it. This also is a difficult question in the discussion of communities, and therefore worth our reflection. For this discussion, the framing statement begins with one sentence. It says, "An ecological civilization will be built on the cornerstone of strong local communities, which are capable of participating in global communities of communities." In other words, it presupposes that you can build communities out of communities upon communities upon communities, expanding in this way. And we want to ask you to respond to this difficult question. Is it really possible? Can we build up communities of communities? In other words, how can local communities become the basis for broader political and economic structures? Many of you have thought of it. Could you share your thoughts with the audience, please? David knows this question because
okay,
it's a critique of the commons that it cannot be scaled, and I know you've written about it.
I would say that these things already exist. There are many transnational digital communities, from open source to Creative Commons to open access scholarly publishing and many others, showing that people with very local circumstances, say in academia, can be part of these robust transnational communities. There's something known as cosmo-local production, where open source principles design something, but they can be locally produced physically, like farm equipment or electronic circuit boards. And so these models do exist. So we shouldn't think solely about geographic, local place-based communities, although of course those are important. I think the big challenge is getting place-based communities to think trans-locally and to collaborate and to get beyond the problem, as one of the chat questioners mentioned, of being parochial or tribal. And that requires a different consciousness. That requires thinking that the local is not something distinct, but interwoven with these larger collectives. I like to talk about the nested I. We're not individuals, we're nested within communities. And I think communities themselves are nested in larger collectives, if not global commerce itself. So the issue is, can local communities develop the consciousness and the instrumentalities, the infrastructures for developing this global collaboration? And I think a lot of that's simply missing right now and needs to be built.
Thank you, David. Would any other panelists like to comment on that question?
Yeah, I can you hear? Yeah. So eco-civilization means we need to build a new value system. We need a new value system. When David said geographically localized, a local community can get into the global community. Now it's what kind of global community? That's a question. The global community of the capitalism market system, or China used to be a very close. We have distributed so many little communities. There's a happy, every village has her own way of living. But when you open up, when you connect to this big global market, like beginning in 1970s, suddenly my farm become chemicalized. You understand? Our fish died overnight because of DDT imported. Because we want to have a TV and we have trade-off or sacred forest for this TV. So that's number one, is we have to really change this value system. Now that's a philosophy, you have to do it. We need a new value system. We need to price the ecosystem services instead of assets, instead of natural resources, the services, which mean beauty is valuable, which mean fresh air is valuable, which mean clean air is more valuable. So that's number one. We need a new value system, not GDP, as you said, not GDP, but the ecosystem services. So education, number one, cultural value, number one. The second, we need a new business model. The trade-off. How can you trade your green tea from the mountain, much higher price than the tea here on the terraces? So that's second. We need a new business model. The third, certainly we need a political involvement, which means we need a inter-community regulation. We need a regulator. It's a law. We need a new law system to say that we have to do that. So three things: cultural, business model, political. Yeah, we have to change totally.
Oh, thank you, Kongjian. That's a very clear answer. Dr. Fan Mei-jun adds, yes, she says, yes, with Professor Yu, we need to change DDP, change our value system. And Whitehead's theory of value can help, she says. Anyone want to respond to this? And then because we're out of time, I ask a closing question if Andrew will allow. For only a 30-second answer, the closing question will be, what gives you hope as you work to strengthen commons, to strengthen local communities? In your life, in your work, what gives you hope? We always ask that question finally. But anyone want to respond to the communities of communities first? I don't know if Seonae wants to do that. Okay.
네, 그
Well,
이제 새로운 가치 시스템을 말씀을 하셨는데
when it comes to the new value system, we can last this kind of way of living, and we have come to realization around the world. So we have come to a stage of thinking, what is the good life? GDP is not an answer, and there are more and more discussions made. It can be a transitional village is one of the solutions, and this movement is taking place in more than 5,000 villages. And then that roots back to what is good life, the value, what is good life. So this movement is spreading, and I see hope in there.
Thank you. And so for the, let me ask each of you, what also brings you hope? As Seonae has just begun the answer, as in your work, your influence, your leadership positions, what gives you hope for the future? Because indeed, local communities are the foundation for an ecological civilization. Kongjian, may I begin with you? What gives you hope in your work?
Well, the hope is because we are at the crisis right now. If you don't change it, you're going to die. That's the hope. So which means the hope comes from crisis. That's why we've been practicing for the past 20 years. It's because we cannot afford this pollution anymore, because we cannot afford this flood anymore. It's an issue of survival, which means you have to change. Without changing, you're going to die. So I think that's a hope.
It's a hard hope, but yeah, it's a hope. David, you work tirelessly for decades. What gives you hope?
Well, I mean, I'm hopeful because there are so many real life examples out there that are already doing this. They're just not culturally visible. And I think that between the co-op movement, the degrowth movement, the transition town movement, the peer production world, the various digital communities, the commons world, there is a commitment to social change, systems change that hasn't been as visible in the past. The pandemic has made people more open-minded and exploratory. And I think the real question is, how do we take this to the next level so that it has mainstream visibility and impact? And I think we're circling that question right now, and events like this help take it another step too. So, it'll be as they say in physics, it'll be a phase shift that happens very suddenly rather than something that happens incrementally over a long period of time. And I think we're approaching a phase shift.
Beautiful answer. And Mona Polacca, you get the last word of our panel. You represent the world's oldest peoples, the deepest, longest wisdom of living with the land, with the river, and with the animals and with each other. As you live, as you do your leadership in so many areas, what brings you hope?
What brings me hope is that there are more and more people who are coming together. There have been efforts that have been made on a global scale, such as the Cochabamba Accord, the Rights of Mother Earth Accord that was passed by a large number of indigenous people in 2010. It's now on the table of the United Nations. The United Nations have begun to include in their documents and instruments Mother Earth, rather than speaking about it as if it's inanimate. We're beginning to see a lot of the revival of much of the traditional earth-based understanding and practices and beliefs about how important our relationship is to the existence of life on Mother Earth. So that gives me hope. There are people who are waking up, so to speak, and I believe that's part of the paradigm shift that we've been talking about. It's beginning to happen. That gives me hope.
Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking this panel for really a brilliant session. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us.
Thank you.
Indeed, that was an absolutely brilliant session. I'm blown away by how much we covered in just an hour, which actually gives me hope of how much we're going to cover over the next 2 hours, because our panelists have set the bar very, very high for cramming good content into a short period. So we are transitioning to our breakout rooms. I hope everyone can stay. We can still be friends if you have to leave, I understand. I'm going to share my screen and just give a reminder of the format for our small group discussion time. So over the next 2 hours, I encourage you to consider this as a flexible guide. It's not a strict sort of instruction manual, but just as a resource to help think about how to shape our conversations in order to lead toward something productive, right? Creating solutions for the well-being of people on the planet. So as we continue to think about communities and cultures for the common good, let's start off by, in our groups, introducing ourselves. Who are we? And thinking about, because who we are makes a difference, right? And then also, where are we? Let's think about our context. We've already heard quite a lot about what's happening around the world, but just as a good starting place, I think, to have a sense of where we're all at in what's happening in the world around us, but also understanding the underlying causes of our immediate crisis and our problems. So how did we get here, right? What contributed to the situation that needs solutions? And then where do we want to go? And this is my favorite part. Let's dream big, right? Let's think about what would an ecological civilization look like. Imagine, 25, 50, even 100 years into the future, what would communities and cultures really look like if they were designed to promote the common good? And then finally, spending hopefully a significant amount of time on this final step, the road mapping piece. How do we get there? Let's begin to articulate concrete steps forward, building on the wonderful suggestions that we've already had from our panelists. And that's it. Those are our instructions. Feel free to explore beyond the bounds of this discussion guide. But if you're wondering what to say or what to think about, the discussion guide's there to help with some guiding questions. Assuming there are no questions or concerns, it is time to continue our small groups. We'll have translators in each of the rooms to help facilitate across the language differences. And we will hopefully have you be taking notes so you can submit those to us as we continue to synthesize toward an overarching vision for ecological civilization out of this international forum. Thank you very much. Andrew Davis. If you will just now accept the invitation to join a breakout room, you will automatically be swept away into a community of communities, or in a fragmented community, I guess is isolationism. That's how breakout rooms work. Oops.
Andrew?
Yes.
This is Kil-sang.
Hi, Kil-sang.
Yeah, could you put me to the Korean people,
Yeah, we'll see if I can find an ideal group for you.
Okay.
Yes. Hi, Arlene.
I have a question. May I please go to the room with either Beverly Parsons and or David Bollier?
Absolutely. Can you make that happen, Andrew?
Will do.
Make it happen, Andrew. And so it is. Thank you.
So it shall be.
By the way, you need to know Beverly Parsons also. She's incredible.
Yeah.
Do you know her?
Only from this. So
Well, she's the former president of the American Evaluation Association.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, hopefully we can follow up more and connect after this. Thank you.
Thank you.
So Andrew, this is Kevin. I have a question.
Yes, Kevin.
If we're uncomfortable with the room that we're in, how do we get back to try to ask to change rooms?
Hit leave. I think it's leave breakout room in the bottom right corner, and then you can cut and you'll snap back into this lobby area.
Okay.
And then we could reassign you.
Got it. Thank you. Okay, I'm going in one.
And it won't be socially awkward because everybody will assume that you're you just dropped off because of internet purposes. So you always have,
Andrew, this is Kershaw.
Yes.
Yeah, I really
Dongwoo. I'm
Yeah.
trying to see if there's a good place for you.
Yeah, I really like to talk to Seonae. What is her name? Seonae. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if she stuck around for the breakout session or not.
Oh, is that right? Okay.
Yeah, I don't believe so. I'm not sure David did as well.
Yeah,
I know it's tough for people over in Asia right now because it's
was confused of the date. Actually, we have a time zone difference, so she
exactly.
It was yesterday, so she rescheduled the session for today, but she need to leave earlier, so she
to go to her meetings and stuff. Yeah,
can't make it.
Well, so I of the 5 people or 6 people in the group, I've already been with almost everyone but one in a different group. So
yeah, how do you feel about room? What room was that, Andrew?
That's
one.
Kevin, and it was 1.
Room 1. Okay,
Kevin. Room 1. What about room 3?
Yeah, I'll try it. I was hoping to be with some people, with some new people.
Perfect. We'll try it. We'll try another one for you.
And Andrew, also I have
Hi,
a question in room 1. If there is somebody available who can translate Chinese, that would be helpful to go into room 1, because there's one
Perfect.
person there who does not speak English very well.
Thank you for letting us know, Kevin.
Yeah,
Yes,
I just thought room 1, it's a big group, right? I saw there. Okay, let me found. So room 2. Okay. Okay, let me. Yeah, I sent the Alan Jeong, so he is good in English to room 1.
Helen helped us yesterday.
Okay, good, good.
Okay.
Okay.
Andrew, can you put me back in room 1, please?
Okay, you got it, Kevin. I'm going to send you to room 2 first, then back to 1, because we have to. I originally sent you to 1, so you'll get 2 invitations.
Okay.
So I click not now.
And now
click not now.
You should get an invitation right
now.
now.
There I am. Okay.
Perfect. Thanks, Kevin.
Okay, so room 2, no Chinese.
Yeah, room 2 is very large. How did I
room 1 is very large, but room 2, only 5 people there in room 2.
How do we get 12 people in room 1?
So because I several people have dropped out before the discussion group, so I was trying to get 12 to 14 per group. We had 5 groups.
All the other groups would have been large too, but then everybody leaves, right?
And also,
that's okay because
Helen also in room 1 now, so they have 2 Chinese who can speak good English. In room 1. Room 2, no need for translation. And room 3, Fangman is good in English.
Okay.
And room 4, let me see. Room 4, no need for English.
Okay.
And room 5, Chong Hui He, it's good in English. But yeah, Chong Hui He. So yeah.
Okay. Well, then is there a particular room you want to go to, Meijin?
Yeah, let me see. Room 1 is too large. Okay. Yeah. It's too large.
Let's Meijin,
maybe room 2 with Dr. Cobb.
Room 2 is probably good.
Yeah, room 2. Okay.
Okay, here it comes. Anyone else who can hear us would like to join a room? We can send you there. Well, great panel. That was fantastic.
Arlene's on with 2 devices, so we could probably move that to the move her Santa Monica device to the waiting room.
Okay.
Let's see. I think Guna probably has to go to work. It's tough when it's a weekday and it's in the morning.
Yeah.
And it makes it hard for people to participate if they have jobs.
But today the